I'm a 28-year-old woman working in a career that I've dedicated a lot of time and effort to build. I have my own style, a cozy apartment that I've decorated exactly the way I like, and a close-knit circle of friends. I like to think of myself as someone who's independent, proud of my individuality, and careful about the things I share. Life's been good, or at least it was, until recently when things started getting, well, weird. It all starts with my younger sister, Sophia. She's 23, and while we've always been close, she's always looked up to me a little too much. Growing up, she'd borrow my clothes, sometimes mimic my mannerisms, and I guess I always brushed it off as her just wanting to be a little like her big sister. That's normal, right? But in the last year or so, it's gone from cute sibling behavior to something that feels almost obsessive. Like she's not just imitating me, she's living my life. The first big thing I noticed was her change in career direction. I work in a pretty niche field, something I studied for years to get into. Recently, out of nowhere, Sophia switched her college major to align with mine. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was genuinely interested. But then, she applied for an internship at my company, the same one I work for. I hadn't even mentioned the internship to her. When I asked her about it, she acted like it was just a coincidence. I just think it's cool what you do, she said, brushing it off. But it didn't stop there. My boyfriend Ethan and I have been together for a couple of years now. He's tall, dark-haired, has a particular sense of style. He dresses casually but well put together, kind of understated but sharp. Not long after the whole internship thing, Sophia shows up at a family gathering with her new boyfriend, who I swear looks like a carbon copy of Ethan. He's dressed the same way, with a similar haircut, even the same type of glasses. Everyone noticed it, and the whole thing made us all uncomfortable. Ethan kept glancing at me with that, "Are you seeing this too?" Look, it was almost like Sophia had gone out and found someone who could be Ethan's twin. Then came the apartment. I'd saved up to move into this cozy little place that I really love. It's one of those older buildings with tons of character, and I spent a lot of time finding the right pieces to make it feel like home. Less than a week after I moved in, Sophia announced she'd just signed a lease in the same building. Not even a heads up, she just casually dropped it into conversation. The worst part? When I asked her why she wanted to live here, she gave me a vague answer about liking the vibe of the building. It felt like she'd found out where I was living and decided it was a good idea for her too. The social media copying was next, and that was where things started getting really strange. I'd post a picture from my favorite coffee shop, and a few days later, Sophia would post from the same place, with a caption, like my new favorite spot. If I shared a shot of my apartment decor, she'd put up something eerily similar, down to the exact plant arrangement. My friends, who usually don't get involved in family stuff, started noticing and privately messaging me about it. "Is Sophia copying your life or something?" one of them asked. Another friend thought it was just a phase, but it didn't feel like one to me. When I brought it up to my parents, they brushed it off. "Oh, you know how she is. It's just sibling stuff," they said, laughing. But this didn't feel like typical sibling stuff. I didn't know how to explain the creeping feeling that I was losing parts of myself, like someone else was taking over little pieces of my life. It was almost like she was shadowing me step by step, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just keep pushing further. Ethan, thankfully, noticed it too. He tried to laugh it off at first, but he admitted he was starting to feel unsettled. He even joked, "If she starts wearing my cologne, I'm out." But there was an edge to his voice that told me he wasn't entirely joking. The whole situation was unsettling, and it felt like something I couldn't control. I finally decided to talk to Sophia directly. I wanted to set boundaries without sounding harsh. I told her it was okay to have her own interests and that she didn't need to be so similar to me. She just looked at me with this blank expression and acted like she had no idea what I was talking about. "I'm just being myself," she said, and I almost believed her. But it was hard to ignore the facts stacking up around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was pretending. Then, there were nights I'd lie awake, wondering what she'd borrow next. My identity felt like it was slipping away, piece by piece. It got to the point where I started feeling paranoid, almost like she was lurking in the background of my life, ready to scoop up anything new I did. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt like I was living in someone else's imitation. I decided to talk to a therapist, someone outside the situation who could help me make sense of it. Talking about it felt surreal, but at the end, I walked out with a new resolve. I needed to do something, not just stand by as Sophia took over my life. It was time to take a stand. Little did she know I was done with this twisted game. Update 1. And so, after talking with my therapist and realizing I couldn't keep letting Sophia shadow every step of my life, I came up with a plan. I'd create a whole series of fake lifestyle updates and see if she'd actually follow along. It was like setting a trap to see how far she'd go. The first step was to change my aesthetic online. I posted a big announcement on social media about how I was embracing minimalism and clearing out my closet. I threw in a dramatic line about how owning less was a path to inner peace and started posting photos of empty spaces in my apartment, racks with only 1 or 2 pieces of clothing, a single pair of shoes, and an otherwise empty entryway. Within days, Sophia posted similar photos, showing off her simplified wardrobe and even talking about her journey towards peace. Her followers ate it up, commenting on how inspired they were by her transformation. It was almost too easy. Next, I went for a visual change, something bold and hard to miss. I got a temporary wig in a shocking shade of electric blue and posted a photo with the caption, "Sometimes you just need a change that shakes things up." The comments were full of friends hyping me up, saying things like "Rebirth looks good on you." I didn't tag Sophia or even hint at her, but a couple of days later, she showed up to a family dinner with her hair dyed the exact same color. I couldn't believe it, she'd really done it. Ethan shot me a look across the table that practically screamed, "Are you seeing this?" I kept the game going, ramping it up to the next level. Out of nowhere, I became obsessed with pottery. I posted pictures of my creations. Okay, they were just store-bought mugs and bowls, but I made them look like works in progress with some flour and clay dust scattered around. Finding so much peace in my new hobby. I wrote. Not long after, Sophia posted about her pottery journey, complete with pictures of a beginner's pottery kit. She even had clay smudges on her face in one of the photos, and I nearly burst out laughing. She was going all in. Then, I casually mentioned on social media that I was considering moving to a remote, out-of-the-way town I'd completely made up. I posted about how the quiet life was calling to me, about how I was dreaming of simple days with no distractions. It was pure nonsense, but it seemed real enough. Sophia started dropping hints in her posts about needing a change of scenery and how a slower pace could be what she needed. She even posted a photo of a rundown little cabin she'd found online, writing about the charm of a quieter life. But I was only just warming up. I knew Sophia was into fitness, so I created an absurd routine that I claimed to follow every day. I posted about stair lunges, hours of stair lunges in my apartment building, and threw in a line about how I found peace in the endurance. A couple of days later, Sophia posted about her dedication to her new workout, complete with a photo of her in the stairwell. The level of commitment was mind-blowing. The best part? My friends were in on it too. They started hyping up every ridiculous post I made, commenting things like, "So inspiring," and "You're a true minimalist icon." Sophia, as expected, was lapping it all up, completely unaware that she was the only one not in on the joke. By now, Sophia's social media was a mirror of my own bizarre lifestyle updates. The health journey was next. I posted a recipe for this disgusting green mush that I claimed was an immune-boosting superfood blend. I was just throwing spinach, seaweed, and wheatgrass together in a blender, and it was honestly too bitter to even drink. I posted a video of myself loving the taste, gagging just out of frame, and within hours, Sophia was sharing her own amazing green mush recipes with a smile that looked about as forced as mine had been. My family started to notice the changes too. They saw Sophia with her new hairstyle, her weird minimalist wardrobe, and her posts about some tiny town none of us had ever heard of. My mom finally called me, sounding genuinely confused. "Is everything okay with Sophia? She seems different." She wasn't wrong. Sophia was changing, but not in the way she thought. As a final touch, I told Sophia directly that I was thinking of quitting my job to pursue a career as an online plant therapist. Some totally made-up role where I'd give advice on how to talk to plants to make them grow better. I laughed as I told her, but she nodded, intrigued. A few days later, she announced to our family that she was thinking of taking a new career path, maybe something involving nature and plant therapy. I nearly choked on my coffee. It all came to a head when our mom, confused and more than a little worried, sat both of us down. She looked at Sophia, genuinely concerned. "What's going on with you, honey? I don't even recognize you anymore." Sophia looked at me, unsure what to say, while I just sat there, quietly enjoying the spectacle. By the end of it all, I felt an odd mix of relief and satisfaction. Sophia had been given a full dose of what it's like to copy someone else's life. Only this time, it was all nonsense. It wasn't me anymore, it was a parody of my life, and she'd followed along without missing a beat. Update 2. The plan had been working better than I'd expected, but I didn't quite anticipate how quickly it would all start falling apart for Sophia. At first, she was keeping up with every lifestyle shift I threw her way, following each change with almost frightening dedication. But then, cracks began to show. One morning, I noticed her latest post on social media. It was a dark, moody photo with a caption, like "feeling lost lately trying to find myself." Comments started flooding in, some from her friends expressing concern, others just posting generic support. It was clear she was feeling the strain of keeping up this exaggerated version of my life, and even her followers were starting to pick up on it. Over the next week, Sophia's posts became less frequent. She still had her bizarre routines, but they were starting to look forced, and there was this exhausted, hollow look in her eyes. Friends who used to comment on her posts started going quiet, too. I overheard one of them at a coffee shop telling another that Sophia's personality had done a complete 180. "I don't even know who she is anymore," one of them said, glancing nervously at her phone. It was obvious her friends were pulling away, probably feeling just as confused as the rest of us about this new version of Sophia. Ethan found the whole thing funny at first. "Your sister's committed. I'll give her that," he said, chuckling when I told him about her latest stair lunge post. But later, after watching her put on the same fake smile in yet another pottery journey update, he got a little quieter. "I almost feel bad for her," he admitted. It was like watching her slowly unravel, unable to keep up with the ridiculous standards she'd been trying to follow. Things only got worse when Sophia applied for an internship at my company. I hadn't mentioned the position to her, but somehow she found out about it and sent in an application. I didn't interfere, but I knew she wasn't qualified yet. She lacked the necessary experience, something I'd spent years building up. When she didn't get the offer, I could tell she was furious. Her texts to me grew tense, almost accusatory, and she started hinting that I'd somehow sabotaged her chances. She seemed convinced that I'd set the standards too high on purpose, that I'd somehow made it impossible for her to succeed. At a family dinner not long after that, she finally confronted me. She'd clearly had enough of trying to keep up with my influencer lifestyle, and now she was looking for someone to blame. She made a scene, talking about how hard she'd been trying to live up to my standards, how I'd created this image that she could never match. The whole table went quiet. I sat there, just listening while she painted me as the villain of her story, the unattainable example she felt forced to chase. When she was done, I calmly told her I was just living my life. I hadn't set any standards for her to live up to, nor had I pushed her to follow my choices. I reminded her that she'd been copying me, sometimes down to the smallest details, and that maybe she needed to find her own path. Our mom, who had been quietly observing the whole exchange, finally intervened. She turned to Sophia and told her, gently but firmly, that it was time for her to stop trying to live Grace's life and start focusing on her own. Sophia's face turned red, and for a moment I thought she might storm out. Instead, she stared at me, angry but silent. I suggested softly that maybe talking to someone could help her understand why she felt the need to imitate everything I did. She didn't respond, but there was a flash of something, shock, maybe, or realization, that crossed her face before she looked away. After that dinner, Sophia went completely silent on social media. No more minimalist posts, no pottery photos, no stair lunges or plant therapy rants. The sudden silence felt strange at first, but I could almost feel the tension lifting, like I could finally breathe again. I could go back to posting about my life without worrying about what she might copy next. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace creeping back into my life. Ethan noticed the difference too. One night, as we were sitting on the couch scrolling through our phones, he glanced at me with a smile. "Looks like you finally got your life back," he said, holding up his phone to show me Sophia's now empty profile. There was a weight to his words that made me pause, and I knew he was right. After everything, I finally felt free to just be myself without someone constantly watching, mirroring every move. In the weeks that followed, I focused on my work, my friends, and my relationship with Ethan. I found myself investing more time in my hobbies, meeting friends for coffee, and just enjoying my routines. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to live without someone watching every single thing I did, waiting to mimic it. Looking back, I realized how far I'd come, how important it was to stand up for my own identity. I'd always loved my sister, but I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing pieces of myself to keep her happy. For the first time, I felt like I'd reclaimed my life, and that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learned the lesson I'd been trying to teach her all along. Update 3. A few weeks went by after Sophia's social media silence, and I was finally starting to relax, thinking maybe things had settled. Then, out of nowhere, she reappeared online with a grand announcement. She posted a picture of herself standing in a park with a long, poetic caption about starting fresh and focusing on self-discovery. She talked about distancing herself from external influences and embracing her individuality, as if it was some sort of dramatic rebirth. I wasn't sure whether to be amused or suspicious. On the one hand, she was finally talking about finding her own path, but the language she used felt oddly familiar, like she was just rephrasing things I'd said to her in our past conversations. It was as if she was trying to declare her independence while still taking cues from me. I figured I'd just keep an eye on things and hope she was genuinely trying to grow. Over the next few days, Sophia's social media became a flood of updates. She posted about her new friend circle, tagging some people I recognized from my own network. These weren't my closest friends, but they were people I'd met at events, acquaintances who I'd chat with at gatherings. She'd somehow connected with them, and was now posting selfies with them, using captions about finding her tribe. I couldn't shake the feeling that, once again, she was following my steps, just in a more subtle way. Then came the hobbies. Sophia began posting about all these unique interests she was suddenly passionate about. She was getting into tarot reading, collecting crystals, and making DIY jewelry. Funny thing was, these were all hobbies I'd briefly considered but never really pursued. It was almost like she'd taken ideas I'd once casually mentioned and decided to make them part of her self-discovery. Ethan noticed too and joked that her new independent path was just a recycled version of my past ideas. At our next family gathering, Sophia started making passive-aggressive comments, dropping little remarks about how she was finally free to be herself and how she'd felt stifled for years. She wasn't looking at me, but it was clear who those comments were aimed at. I tried to ignore it, hoping she'd let it go, but by the end of dinner, it was hard to stay silent. So, I set a boundary right there. Calmly but clearly, I told her that I was glad she was finding her own way, but I needed her to genuinely follow her own interests without dragging me into it. The room went quiet and Sophia's expression shifted. She looked me dead in the eye and claimed that I'd never let her explore her own interests and that the only reason she'd ever copied me was because I'd made her feel judged. It was an awkward silence after that. My mom tried to change the topic, but the tension lingered. My friends, when I told them later, advised me to keep setting boundaries and not get caught up in her provocations. They pointed out that it was just another way for her to pull me back in, and they were right. Soon after, Sophia's social media took another turn. She started posting these vague, almost cryptic status updates. Things like it's hard being the misunderstood sibling, or people love to keep you in their shadow when they're afraid you'll shine on your own. She was clearly playing the role of the victim, painting herself as the sibling who'd always been overshadowed. It was strange watching this unfold, like she was casting us both in some drama that only existed in her head. Our mom eventually called, sounding worried. She mentioned how stressed Sophia seemed and hinted that she wished I'd reach out to make peace. I knew she just wanted the tension to end, but I couldn't bring myself to back down this time. I'd spent so long letting Sophia define my life that I couldn't just sweep it under the rug because it was uncomfortable. My therapist even reminded me to stay grounded and not let Sophia's issues become my responsibility. Still, the whole situation was exhausting. Every time I thought about reaching out, I remembered how draining it had been to constantly defend my own life choices. I started wondering if maybe the best move was to just ignore her altogether. No matter what she posted or hinted at, maybe I could just keep doing my own thing and let her wear herself out. With that decision, I shifted my focus back to my own projects. I stopped checking her social media updates, muted notifications, and told myself that whatever she did was her business, not mine. I had my own life to live, and I wasn't going to let Sophia's drama control it. For the first time, I felt like I could actually put some distance between us without feeling guilty. Update 4. After Sophia's big self-discovery phase on social media, things didn't seem to be going quite the way she'd expected. Her new friends, the ones she'd connected with from my extended social circle, were starting to distance themselves. I got messages here and there from people who'd hung out with her, asking if she was okay. They'd mention how her personality kept shifting, how she'd talk about being misunderstood in vague, dramatic terms. A few admitted they found it hard to get close to her, saying she seemed inconsistent, like she was putting on an act. Then, Sophia's professional life started to hit roadblocks. She applied for several internships, including a couple in my field. I'd heard through the grapevine that her interviews didn't go well. The feedback hinted that she came across as scattered, like she didn't quite know who she was or what she wanted. It wasn't surprising. I could see how trying to keep up with every change she'd imitated from me might have made her lose any clear sense of her own goals. One rejection followed another, and she seemed more frustrated with each one. Finally, after a few weeks of silence, Sophia broke down on social media with a long, emotional post. She wrote about feeling lost, about how hard it was to find her path, and how she'd always felt overshadowed. There was a line in there about people setting impossible standards and how she'd never be good enough in their eyes. She didn't mention my name, but it was obvious who she was referring to. Her followers commented with support, sending heart emojis and encouraging words, but it was clear to everyone close to us that this was about her fixation on my life. My parents, seeing the post, grew concerned. They didn't follow all the details of what was happening, but they could tell Sophia was struggling. They called me, asking if I'd talk to her and try to work things out. After some back and forth, I agreed. I didn't want to keep clashing with her, and if there was any way to help her find her own way, I was willing to try. We met at a quiet coffee shop a few days later. The atmosphere was tense from the start, but I went in calm, ready to listen. Sophia, however, didn't hold back. She opened with how she felt ruined by the example I'd set, going on about how my choices had always overshadowed hers, making it impossible for her to find her own path. Her frustration poured out, and she kept bringing up every achievement of mine, as though I'd intentionally made my life harder for her to follow. It was almost surreal. When she was done, I responded as gently as I could, explaining that I'd never intended to be any sort of standard for her. I told her she'd spent years chasing an image of my life that was never meant to be her own. If she was struggling, it wasn't because of my choices, it was because she'd been living through my identity instead of building her own. That's when she snapped, accusing me of being selfish and judgmental. Her voice started to shake, and I could see the frustration building, until her anger turned to tears. She looked away, clearly trying to keep herself together, and for a moment we both just sat there in silence. Finally, I told her that I loved her and wanted to see her happy, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my own peace to appease her. I reminded her that we both needed space to grow as individuals. I said it calmly, hoping she'd understand that this wasn't about rejecting her but about allowing each of us to live our lives fully. After a tense silence, she finally admitted, almost reluctantly, that she didn't even know where to begin. She'd been so focused on following my choices that she didn't know what her own looked like. I offered to support her, to help her explore her interests, but I made it clear that she needed to find a path that was truly hers. She nodded, still quiet, but I could see that the reality of it all was starting to sink in. Back at home, my mom thanked me for talking to her, acknowledging that this situation had taken a toll on me. She hoped that this conversation would be a turning point, something that could finally help Sophia find her way. I appreciated her support, and for once it felt like we were all finally on the same page. In the weeks that followed, Sophia went quiet on social media again. No more dramatic posts or mysterious quotes. It was as though she'd finally stepped back to reflect. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that constant tension in the background. I stopped checking her profile, focused on my own work, and poured my energy into my friendships and relationship with Ethan. Ethan, noticing the change, pointed out how far I'd come in setting boundaries. We both knew how hard it had been to finally stand up for myself, and he congratulated me on reclaiming my life. It felt like a new chapter was starting, one where I could live freely without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what part of my life Sophia might take next. Reflecting on everything, I realized that I'd done all I could. I'd set my boundaries, encouraged her to find her own way, and stayed true to my own path. I didn't know what the future held for Sophia, but I knew I'd done everything possible to help her start a journey that was hers alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace, and I was ready to move forward, knowing I'd done my part. Update 5. A few weeks passed in relative calm, and then gradually Sophia reappeared on social media. Her posts this time looked different, genuine, even refreshing. She was sharing snapshots from a book club she'd joined, talking about the books she was reading and engaging with other members. There was a post about a local hiking group she'd started going on trails with, sharing views from mountaintops and tagging friends from the group. I noticed she'd also started volunteering at a local animal shelter and had a picture up of herself holding a scruffy dog, beaming in a way that didn't feel forced or rehearsed. For once, it seemed like she was truly doing things for herself. Seeing these changes made family gatherings feel lighter too. There was no longer that underlying tension that had followed us everywhere for months. Sophia seemed at ease, and so did I. Our parents, watching this newfound dynamic between us, looked visibly relieved, as if they'd been holding their breath and could finally exhale. It was clear they were just happy to see both their daughters at peace. One afternoon, while our mom was finishing up in the kitchen, Sophia approached me quietly. She looked a little nervous but determined. Without any drama, she admitted how she'd often felt inadequate and insecure, and that she'd tried to fill those gaps by looking to me for direction. She spoke about how she'd copied me, not out of malice, but because she genuinely believed that was the only way to feel like she was worth something. Hearing her honesty, I felt a strange mixture of relief and compassion. When she finished, I told her I forgave her. I acknowledged that we were both still figuring out who we were, and I appreciated her openness. We stood there for a few moments in silence, and it felt like a weight was lifted. There was a sense of understanding between us, one that hadn't been there before. We made an unspoken agreement to keep better boundaries. From then on, whenever we spent time together, it felt natural, with each of us bringing our own experiences to the table. I even joined her on a few hikes with her group, while she started asking me about my own hobbies, genuinely interested in what I was doing without mirroring it. It was like we'd found a balance, a way to stay close while respecting each other's space. Then came some great news. Sophia had landed an internship in an entirely different field, something unrelated to mine and far better suited to her strengths. When she shared her success with us, I could see she was genuinely excited. She talked about the role, the project she'd be working on, and the team she'd be joining. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and for the first time, I found myself genuinely happy for her, with no hint of worry that she was shadowing my life. Our family celebrated her new job over dinner that evening. My parents were thrilled, and I could see in their eyes how grateful they were to see us finally getting along, each moving forward in our own ways. It felt like all the tension, all the uncomfortable moments and misunderstandings had finally settled. Sophia was on her own path, and I was free to continue on mine. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much we'd both grown. Setting boundaries with Sophia had been difficult, and standing up for myself hadn't come easy. But I was proud of the way I'd handled things, proud that I'd stayed true to myself even when it would have been easier to just ignore the issue. Ethan noticed too. He took me out to celebrate, just the two of us, and over dinner, he raised his glass to toast, saying, "Here's to getting your life back." I smiled, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The saga was finally over, and I felt like I could finally just live, without the constant worry of being shadowed or watched. Sophia and I were finding our way as sisters and as individuals, and for the first time in years, our relationship felt healthy, balanced, and real. The changes showed up in small ways, even on social media. Sophia's posts were now about things that were clearly personal and unique to her, without any hint of the old mimicry. She shared book recommendations, photos of her favorite hiking spots, stories about the animals she was working with at the shelter. There was no more mirroring, no more trying to adopt my life as her own. She was finally living a life that was truly hers, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride seeing her grow. In one of my own posts, I shared a reflection about the experience. I expressed gratitude for the lessons I'd learned, the boundaries I'd finally set, and the renewed closeness with my sister. It wasn't a dramatic post, just a simple note about the importance of standing up for yourself and allowing the people you love to find their own way. The response was unexpectedly supportive, with friends and acquaintances commenting on how important it was to hear stories of family growth and boundaries. With Sophia on her own path, my sense of self felt stronger than ever. The journey hadn't been easy, but looking back, I wouldn't change it. We'd both learned what it meant to truly find ourselves, and for the first time, I was finally at peace.